Hello, everyone. Welcome to this AbleNet webinar. And I was just telling someone, actually the main AbleNet person, the chairperson, that I'm surprised in a way that there is a lot of interest on this topic. On the one hand, while I'm surprised, I'm also excited that there is a lot of interest in this topic. While this is not exactly a very highly attractive subject of promoting and advancing personal living skills for students who are experiencing severe and multiple disabilities, it's a very, very essential topic. So welcome to this webinar, and I think it is because all of you recognize it as a very valuable topic, you have joined this webinar. Thank you. What are we going to be talking about? This student population, students with severe and multiple disabilities, they do not necessarily present a very homogeneous picture. There is quite a diversity of skill levels. Some of them may have some academic skills, and some of them may be having very difficult time in terms of using words to communicate, and some of them may have physical and motor needs which requires a wheelchair use, and these may pose as barriers when we look at it. And in order to advance their personal living, functional and life skills, how do we do that? How do we make sure we focus on the strengths that they bring, the preferences that they have, the interests that they have, and not consider these needs as barriers to their learning? And at the same time, how do we try to embed these functional and life skills as part of the academic curriculum, which every one of us working with students with severe and multiple disabilities have to implement? So some of the topics that we are going to be talking about is how do we order a meal when we go on a community-based instruction, or when students go with their families to an eatery, and then also something about personal grooming, which is extremely critical and important for these students in order for them to give a good perception of themselves. And I will also be touching on some pre-vocational and job preparation, in other words, work simulation experiences that you can provide. So for some students, it may be a question of moving them from full participation, if they are not able to, from partial participation or no participation to a greater level of participation. How do we maximize their participation so that they can gain greater self-dependence and reduce the dependence on adults? So we will look at a variety of adaptation ideas, personalized supports, so that when a person walks into a classroom and views a student with severe and multiple disabilities, they are not filled with pity towards the student, but much more, oh, he can do that. Oh, he can do that. Look at that amazing thing that's going on here. So I'm sure every one of you is dedicated to that idea. So we have here a poll. So let us know, or let me know, what is your role within the organization, wherever you are? Are you a special ed teacher, speech pathologist, parent, occupational physical therapist, general education teacher, administrator, or other support staff? Okay, this is interesting. We are seeing a lot of other support staff and also occupational and physical therapist, from whom I have learned a lot, and from assistive technology specialists, from whom I have learned a lot, so I owe a lot to them too. So there is a great deal of support staff, and there are, as always in these webinars, we do have a lot of speech pathologists joining us. And I think I am going to skip to results. Okay, the majority or other support staff and a lot of speech pathologists. And it is important, even though parents have not joined, I think it is the responsibility of each one of us to be in continuous communication with families and empower them to enable their child with significant needs, so that when they go into the community or when they have relatives visiting, their child is not seen as one who needs a lot of help, but who can do things for himself or herself. So these are some of my publications. I am an author of multiple books and quick reference guides, and I also have a para-educator training program that with multiple units. But for this presentation, my main source, even though I have taken from other books, of some of my other books and other resources that others have written, my main source for this book is a book on severe and multiple disabilities that I have written for LRP publications. It's called Serving Students with Severe and Multiple Disabilities. Another book is also, it looks at the new ESSA, the new law, and in terms of that law, how do we enable students with significant disabilities? So those are the two major sources for this webinar. So when you are thinking in terms of your instructional framework and you are trying to implement your curriculum-based activities, and you want to make sure your students who may be experiencing cognitive communication and motor and also possibly behavioral needs, how do we make sure that the students access the curriculum, attain meaningful functional and personal and also academic outcomes at the same time? So one of the first things, this I have mentioned in many of my webinars, is making sure you are applying universal design for learning principles so that learning is accessible and the student has an opportunity to engage with that instruction, and they are also able to, in their own way, respond to that instruction. And one of the other things that I want to emphasize, sometimes we think in order for the student to be able to participate, they have to participate fully and cooperatively and in the same way as other students without the special needs participate. But we don't think in terms often about how can we make sure that the student participates at least partially. Let me give an example. Let's say if the student is not able to lift the spoon and turn the spoon over and put the food in his mouth, is there any way, can he at least pick up that spoon, or can he pick up some, with the help of a fork, can he pick up a piece of food? And even though he may need or she may need assistance in turning that food and dropping it into the mouth, there is an element of participation even in picking up the food. So we have to think in terms of breaking that actual task into multiple segments and see what can the student do. And sometimes we do need to use adaptations, and we will go into that in a few minutes. And another example of kind of modification, adaptation, I have seen somewhat sadly that even in some high school classrooms, I see students the teacher or the para-educator often holds the student's hand and traces things or traces his names, and it's completely hand prompting. Is there a way the student can have a glove, and can a stamp be attached with Velcro on that glove? And can the student stamp his name? So that it's not exactly a partial participation, but it is almost full participation, but it is a personalized adaptation and support. So can we try and think in terms of that? Engaging and making sure our instruction is very highly engaging, motivating, and attention-grabbing for the student to be able to participate. And that's even more essential for students who have limited attention span due to a variety of reasons. And can we consistently use technology? One point I do want to mention here, sometimes we do not necessarily match the technology with the student's ability to press the icon. We give a student an iPad with multiple icons, and then we take the student's hand and kind of get him to press that. Why don't we first train the student with 2 or 3 icons, or with an assistive technology device like the iTalk2 communicator from AbleNet, and get him or her to be able to press yes or no, making a choice between 2 items, and then gain that ability to make a choice and gain that ability to press that device before we give an iPad with multiple icons. And the other most important things, once you have a student with significant and severe and multiple disabilities, it is extremely important that the materials used and the adaptations are age appropriate. One of the things that I have noticed, I'm sure it does not happen in many classrooms, but it does happen in some of the classrooms that for some school districts that I consult for, and that is when a student in a middle school or a high school or even at the elementary level kind of has a bib that we use with babies around their neck when they are eating. As you walk into the classroom, it gives a certain impression that the student is kind of helpless. And if you see the para-educator who is feeding that student is trying to wipe his or her mouth, then it makes us feel like, we kind of engage in thinking that the student is totally helpless. Is there a way that we can use, maybe get the student, if at all possible, attached, and even if the student has a closed fist, can the student have kind of a towel that he uses and teach him to wipe, or at least engage in that act so that we are not seeing a kind of a baby's bib around the student's neck. So that's kind of the essential framework. So some of the things I have already shared with you. One of the things is, how do we integrate the academic and the functional and the life outcomes together in planning our activities? How do we personalize it? How do we personalize the activity and match the adaptation to the activity? And as I mentioned earlier, the student may exhibit a variety of communication and cognitive needs, and may have some difficulty separating himself, if the student especially has profound impairment, separating himself from the environment. And attention may be an issue, and a high degree of distractibility may be another issue, and there may be other issues like visual and medical problems, but let us not think of that as barriers, but let us think of them as challenges to overcome. And that should not limit our exposure, and we have to make sure that the student has multiple opportunities to practice. One of the things I want to emphasize throughout, We have a tendency to over-prompt, and that, in a way, promotes learner helplessness, and the student comes to depend on the adult to do everything for her or for him, and we want to make sure that does not interfere with the student developing self-dependence. I will give, for example, an example, and that is, which I have seen frequently, when a student with severe needs is going from one classroom to, let's say, the music room, the cafeteria, or to the gym, or to ADPE. One of the things I have often noticed is, even at the high school level, the paraeducator who may be taking him or taking her has a tendency to hold the student's hand. What we have to train and do is to make sure we walk alongside him, and before leaving, if it is a student who has a tendency to run, that we have to make sure we have to provide advance warning and prepare the student for that next environment through a picture schedule or an object schedule. So that is one thing where when others see that a high school student is being kind of held and walked to the other room, that it does not help promote self-dependence. So what are some personal living skills? One of the things may be personal hygiene. When we think about personal living skills, these are all the things we need to focus on independent functioning in order for the student to achieve independent functioning. Yes, it is not possible to focus on all of them at the same time, but we gradually, over a period of time, we train from early childhood onwards to high school to focus on many of these things, so that when the student is in the middle school or high school, they are much more self-dependent. Personal hygiene, which may or may not be possible in some cases, and the student may need some support and may need diapering, and in that case, we need to even use that time as on-the-go time to engage the student. And one of the first things you want to be able to do is to be able to use a calendar. Can the student identify? And I have an example of an adapted calendar that I will share with you in a little bit. And to be able to identify what day of the week it is. Is it a school day or is it a weekend? And then being able to reading the weather. Is it going to rain? How do you feel the rain? Just sprinkle some water on the hand, and that's kind of water and rain, and then touch some cotton ball, and then you feel like it is snowing outside, and you see something warm, or you see a picture of the sun, or you see an object that's shaped with rays, and that's like a sun. So these are, you take sunglasses, for example, and you put the sunglasses on, say, oh, what does that mean? That means it's indicating that it is sunny and I have to wear my sunglasses. So kind of connecting some concrete objects with the weather will help to read about the weather or to recognize the symbols associated with the weather. And one of the most important things that I do want to emphasize, and this is something you may want to share with the family also, is that personal appearance is important, and how the student appears influences how we view the student. And so one of the activities could be at home and at school is selecting appropriate clothes to match with the weather. And one of the most important things that students learn to do, all students, irrespective of their needs, is to learn to follow directions and instructions given by the teacher and other specialists and all that. So that's an important thing. At the very beginning, you start training. Then one of the next most important thing is making choice. Initially, it may be between 2 items, and then gradually increase it to 3, 4, and when you're doing 3, maybe 1 distractor, 1 kind of closely related, and 1 the right choice. And then one of the easiest opportunities that they have is if they are able to have lunch without the need for G-tube feeding, they can make a choice with lunch. And only thing is we need to make sure that it is limited choices and an adapted menu card. And the other thing is engaging in social interaction. Just because the student is not able to use words to communicate does not mean the student is not engaging. We have to provide opportunities for social interaction, as also with students who are their typical peers. And one of the activities that you may do would be doing laundry. What would a student with severe or multiple disabilities be able to do? Can he or she drop the clothes in the washing machine? Can they do that? Can they hold it in their hand and just release the hand and drop it? So we have to think in terms of how they partially participate. And making healthy food choices, and that will combine with science and nutrition and health. Cooking activities, how do they participate? Partially and fully. Making shopping experiences when teachers go on a community-based instruction and they buy certain groceries in order to cook something. Is it possible that a student with significant needs is given two choices to pick from, and this is selected in advance, and the student is trained either with an actual object or with a picture. This is what you are looking for, so this is what you pick up. And then one will be a completely wrong, which you do not find in the grocery section, which is clothes, and then one item that they have to, which would be the correct choice. And then they try to match it with that item in the grocery store. And maybe they pick up an apple and put it in a bag. Or if they are not able to put it in the bag, they point to the apple as the choice that they have to pick for their whatever they are making, maybe apple pie. And then another student who does not have motor difficulty may be able to pick up that object. So we can pair students together. And also we can have students who are somewhat higher functioning to be able to do the budgeting. Okay, the apple, which apple do I pick? The one that costs a bag of apples is $3, another one that costs $5 for the bag of apples. Which one do I pick? Which is the cheaper one? So you can have them make those choices and kind of teaching them how to use the telephone, and then I will share with you some work preparation, work simulation, job preparation within the campus and then outside. Then, as I mentioned, one of the important things, how do we order a meal? And that also I will elaborate it with a more detailed example. As I said again and again, we have to make sure there is accessibility. We have to adjust the task complexity. I gave you several examples. And we want to promote active student participation. And already I mentioned about the universal design for learning. So begin with a clear vision of what you want that specific student to be able to achieve in terms of the learning objectives. And I'm giving several examples. So break it into subtasks and get that student make progress at each one of these subtasks before they move on to gaining the whole mastery of the whole objective. And make student-specific adaptations and get the student actively involved and include partial participation. So this is kind of a chart. It is you try to make the environment, the room setup, amenable to the student. So you may attach, if you have a word wall, you may attach some concrete objects as well as some picture symbols. You make sure that all the items that are easily accessible and that the assistive technology devices are daily used and accessible. And you may want to use some alternative materials, and throughout I will share with you what are some of those things, and I already mentioned some of the things. And simplify the task as much as possible for that student, so that break the task down and allow partial participation. One of the things that you want to consider as you are adapting. Is the adaptation helping, or is it hindering the student from becoming self-dependent? So that's an important step as you decide on the adaptation. Is the adaptation going to lead to increased participation? Is that going to enable, if you use a Velcroed glove, a glove that's Velcroed, and then you attach an object, is that something that they can use in a variety of settings, or is it going to be very difficult? Which one is easier and take less time? Teaching the student to use the adaptation regularly and consistently, or the required skill itself to participate in the activity without any adaptation. So these are some things. And one of the things that I do want to mention at this point is to use peers as supports and peer-mediated intervention and adult support, as long as it is carefully choreographed. That's important. That's usually the paraeducator who may be doing, but it has to be carefully choreographed, invisible, and it should not be one where it is overwhelming the student and doing everything for the student. So, as I mentioned, some adapted calendar. This one, for example, each day is given a certain theme, let's say. Monday, we go to the library. Each one of you may have a different theme, but you can use that in order for the student to associate that particular activity with that particular day of the week, so that gradually you're building that concept about the different days of the week. That will help the student both grow cognitively as well as to be able to know the days of the week. And then using concrete objects, like the top one with the picture of the tree, what are some things that a tree gives? Let's say to build the concept, you associate certain objects with that particular concept. And that also helps, at least in the initial stages, and then you can move on to pictures. And it is possible that the student associates a certain text associated with that object or picture, and always paired with text. And then math, counting. Can you begin simply with objects and then move on to the actual abstract items? As I mentioned, peer support. Peers can do a variety of things. They can provide coaching. You can provide coaching and guidance to the peers in order to provide the optimal support to the student. They can be tutors. They can come and play games. They can read books. They can help them in the cafeteria. They can play with them in the playground. And they can also maybe assist. Different students can take turns during community-based instruction trips and help the student with significant needs. And they can also record messages for the student. They can record step-by-step instruction on the assistive technology device. They can record books, and the student can listen to them. And it's a peer-mediated intervention, is an evidence-based practice, but it is not used as much as it should be. Another thing that's very heavily used is the paraeducator support, and it is important that that paraeducator support, it's not visualized as a paraeducator always sitting right next to the student within 3 feet and guiding every action. I think that prevents the student from, enabling the student to be much more self-dependent. So we need to carefully have a clear understanding and proper training of the paraeducator so that the paraeducator support is discreet and almost invisible, but at the same time powerful and helpful. One of the first things that we want to think about when we think about making the student advocate for himself and self-dependent, we want to make sure the student's deportment, the behavior, the way he appears, the personal, physical, and outward appearance because, as I mentioned earlier, it does color our perception. So how can we build his or her image positively, and how do we influence their perceptions of others? First, one of the things that you want to do is to teach the student how to greet others. If the student is not able to use his hands to wave, or if the student is not able to say hello to greet others, maybe he can or she can smile and at the same time press a device, a small little device, and say hello. That's kind of discrete device. And there is actually a tool, I think it's called a pocket device. It's available from Attainment. Or the student can, if the student can shake hands, if the student can wave, that would be even better. We need to teach. And if the student can make a gesture, kind of acknowledging the other person, that's something we need to train. But one of the things I do want to mention at this point, frequently what happens is sometimes students, with even at the high school level, they try to come and give a hug to a stranger. And we need to teach them that it is important for them to shake hands rather than come and give a hug. I think we do need to make a point of teaching that to all students. The way to greet is to shake hands. And then if the student engages in kind of behaviors that are not appropriate, like biting on a piece of cloth that's around their neck, can we try to give them something that draws less attention? Can we give them like a tangled toy so that they are manipulating that? Or a key ring with some colored attachments to it? Can they manipulate that? Or can they be doing some little puzzle, which is tiny puzzle, or a calculator, small calculator, so that it looks more appropriate for a student to be working on that than biting on a piece of cloth? And can we use these things to make sure that the student earns respect as an individual? So that's extremely important, and we need to teach the student definitely how to greet others and to shake hands, or if that is not possible, another way they nod or say hello using a device. One of the first things that you want to, as part of this personal development, is the student partially participate, if that is the only way he can do it, is to create a personal ID card. And you can use it as a PowerPoint presentation. Either a peer can type the name, or if the student is able to type one at a time and match a letter with the keyboard and presses that letter and then types his name, that's all the better, instead of an adult or a peer doing it. And types in the information, and an adult or a peer can type the rest of the information if that is difficult. But if we can make it in such a way, let's say the age is 11, can the student given choices of 11, 13, and 14, or maybe just matching it to the keyboard and presses that number with an adaptive device, then that's definitely much better. So the student generates facts about himself, and that goes on the ID card. And this is a student-prepared ID card, and some schools already, many schools I would say, have a district-prepared or the school-prepared ID cards, but it is also a good idea for the student to participate in that so that he has some idea of what that ID card means, that it is information about him or her. Another thing, unfortunately, what's happening is this particular slide, some of the things that I had went up, and you may not be able to see all of that. It is, knowing about himself and knowing about the peers in her class, in his class. So what can we do? Can we create a PowerPoint presentation, and we are embedding photographs of different students within that classroom, and so that the student is able to not only recognize himself, but also the peers in his class. And then as a PowerPoint presentation, it is transitioning. They recognize the different students, and maybe one person who is able to verbalize may name all the students and touch. Another person may be touching the picture, and or it may be broadcast on a larger screen, because many of you have smart boards, so that, and use that as a way to create a kind of a timeline from the time of birth to entering kindergarten to something participating in Special Olympics, and now what their particular grade. So you can even use printed labels, and they can stick it on and then create a timeline about themselves. So that's another way they can learn about themselves. So they can make an all about me book, and this could be like a project, but they learn about themselves. Given choices, they make the selection. Their 3 favorite foods, their 3 favorite friends, or 2 favorite friends. Using those pictures of their peers that I mentioned about earlier, they can select and put that in that template. And then they can think about 3 things they like about school, what are some things that they enjoy, what are the activities. So they create kind of a chart, and then they make it into a book. And so it is important, begin with the end in mind. Where do you want the student to be? How will this activity advance the student in personal living and functional skill? How will the student become more independent? How will it improve his or her quality of life? How will the perception of the student by others change or positively? Where do we want the student to be in 5 years' time? And that is something, starting in early childhood, it should be something that's revised. And there is a special tool called the MAPS tool that you may be able to check out information online, and that you can use along with the family's participation in that. So most important thing, we want to broaden the student's world through the activities that we provide her. So personal grooming. So when we are thinking in terms of personal grooming, what are some of the things that we have to, what are the steps involved? How do we break it down? Let the student, first of all, gather the materials. If the student is able to do that independently, it may be that somebody holds these objects and the student picks them, or it is possible the student eye gazes them. So these are all variety of options. Brush and paste for the activity, let's say for brushing teeth. Can, assist if necessary. Turn on the water. That's the next step for toothbrushing. Then rinse the toothbrush. Put the toothpaste on the toothbrush. And adults may have to help with this step. Open the mouth for brushing if the adult is brushing or the student independently brushes. We have to make sure what the student is able to do and push it to the maximum limit if at all possible. Rinse the mouth, turn off the water, wipe the mouth, and it is helpful at this point to kind of put a picture sequence, and some teachers do that, to a picture sequence paired with text. That helps. And if you have students with very significant, severe, and multiple disabilities, it may be helpful to even have objects associated with each of these subtasks within the major task. And then you can also book like a brushing my teeth book or my hygiene book, my personal grooming book. You can make it, and it can be fun, and you can attach actual objects so that they build concept. Brush my teeth, and you can use rhyming words, and you can do a variety of things to make a book. And you can, as I said, you can attach actual concrete items to the book, either with Velcro or with a plastic liner. Okay, so what are, let's say, the personal grooming? That was about brushing teeth. Now, what are some of the things, the learning objectives associated with this particular personal grooming goal that you may have. So there are several steps and several learning objectives that you can incorporate so that as the student is making progress, you can monitor the progress. Is the student able to grasp and hold the brush? Is the student able to turn water on and off? So you want to examine these things and provide adaptation only if it is needed, not because it is faster if the adult did it. So you really want to see, can the student independently brush? Does he have the motor ability? Can she wash her face independently? Can she push down on a soap dispenser? What it is, what step can the student do independently? Look at these as learning objectives for you to monitor the progress. Can the student rinse and dry hands? And then finally, you do want the student to feel a sense of accomplishment and pride in completing the task by herself. So, personal hygiene, again, some general guidelines. Break down the task. Make it into as many small steps as possible. Identify which of those steps the student can do. Monitor progress. Have all the materials for the task available in the same location each time the student tries to access, or the student has a box where he has these materials and is reminded to take it, and then the student himself or herself remembers to take it for that particular task as soon as you point to the task aided with a picture. Begin the routine with the same verbal direction or with a picture symbol paired with the verbal direction. And as I said, show the sequence of activities, sequence of steps posted next to the area where most of the activity is done. And then in order to sustain student motivation and interest, try to blend in some novelty because that's extremely important for students who are experiencing difficulty, attention, and lower levels of motivation. A colorful brush or change the brand of paste because you want to prevent behavior problems arising in these activities. So you want to make sure that, and an automatic faucet, sensitive to movement. And then, of course, one of the most important source of help for all of you, and as it happens, many OTs and PTs have joined this session, they will be the most helpful resource for every educator trying to work on these tasks with their students. And also share information with the family so that they can follow these kind of same steps at home instead of doing everything for the child at home to promote his or her independence, self-dependence. For some strange reason, this time around, maybe I should have used a different slide PowerPoint format. Some of these have moved. I apologize. Ordering a meal. So many families do go out to different eateries, and you want to practice it as part of the community-based instruction in the school setting, and then also share the information with the family. What are some tasks involved in choosing? So is there a way you can have like an adapted menu? In other words, you contact that restaurant, or if it is something that you regularly, year after year, you visit that restaurant, you have their menu, bring that menu back to your classroom, and instead of using the entire menu, can you reduce the items to a few items? Maybe the place has several sandwiches, and then you limit it to 2 or 3, or if it's a pizza place, maybe 2 or 3 ingredients that go, so that it is easier for the student to make the choice. And they make the choice before you go to that restaurant. And before all of this happens, they practice it at the school cafeteria. They have 2 different choices, and they practice. And then the choices are expanded. So it's a step-by-step progression towards the ultimate goal. And it's very, very easy once you have like a chart that you create, and the student is choosing, and you can certainly use a small button. For example, there is one of the AbleNet devices with small little kind of assistive device that you can use, and you can place them together. Then they can use that in order to help the student to make the choice. And this will assist preparing them for the future, or at the same time preparing the student when they go out with their family to a restaurant. And it is an important part of their personal development. But it is all the kind of preparation you make ahead of time before they go to the eatery. So what steps are involved? Join the end of the line. For example, think in terms of, this happens even in the cafeteria. Join the end of the line. Wait in line. Tolerate standing in line. And if the adult is pushing the wheelchair, sit quietly and engage in appropriate kind of wait time activity. Select the food items, making a choice from a picture menu, locate the food counter in a restaurant, get a tray, and also the same within the cafeteria, pay money to the cashier. So think in terms of these various sub-tasks that is involved in going to the cafeteria or going to a restaurant and ordering a meal. And then the associated learning objectives, that you can monitor students' project. Oh, the student can locate the cashier counter. The student can read a picture menu that has been adapted for the student. Can the student point to two pictures of what he wants, maybe a soda and maybe the pizza with just one topping. So can you prepare the student ahead of time for these, and then at the same time monitor where the student is in terms of the learning objective associated with that. One of the other activity would be to be kind of making a sandwich, a simple sandwich. Again, partial participation is one technique you use, and as a group, different students play different roles to the maximum of their skill levels and ability levels and the strengths that they bring to that task. So this will help build vocabulary skills, knowledge of food and nutrition, promote functional communication, aided with technology if needed, and be able to maybe eye gaze to pictures, to objects associated with that task, and making a decision, making a choice. So follow a two-step sequence in terms of, let's say, I get the bread, and then I pick up two slices of bread. Or given two slices of bread, I find the butter, and I find the cucumber slices, let's say if it's a cucumber sandwich. So for a student who may be not making the sandwich to eat, but more to view, to know more, to gain knowledge about food, and if the student is not allowed to swallow it or consume it, you can put the food or the slices of bread in a Ziploc bag and slices cucumber in another Ziploc bag, and then they point to which is the cucumber and which is the bread slice. Even that step increases their concept knowledge about food. And I've also mentioned about a child who's G-tube fed, identifies the dairy product that they consume through this particular activity. And what are some other supports that you need to provide? Make sure that the student is positioned appropriately. This is where your OTs and PTs, occupational therapists and physical therapists, provide guidance. One of the first things, for example, If it's a group activity or if they are eating together as a group, it is important that the student is positioned so that he is facing the others at all possible. Of course, if you're eating in a restaurant, of course you are sitting in a wheelchair, that's where you're going to be. But let's say in a classroom, and they are doing some kind of a table activity. Is there a way that the student could be at the same level, not always in a wheelchair? That's one thing. The other thing is it at all possible, you must provide a kind of a mat with suction cups to stabilize the plate and the bowl on that table so that it is not constantly moving and the student is not struggling to help himself with the food. It helps especially those with motor difficulties. Can you provide adaptive spoons if that is necessary? And that it is consistently used. And if the student is making preparing some kind of a smoothie or something, can you have an environmental control unit connected to that mixer? For a student with visual impairment, can the student help the student to feel the texture of different items? That increases his or her concept knowledge. And try to embed math measurement activities with your cooking activities. So it's not just cooking for fun, but it is to also to teach math, measurement, vocabulary, concept knowledge, all of that integrated within that functional activity. And also basics of hygiene so that they wash their hands before they touch the food and some of these things, or embed it. Okay, so this is a participant pool. Are you using consistently concrete representation to illustrate concepts, or is it primarily only picture symbols? Because based on my observation, I find that majority of the people that I see use mainly picture symbols. Concrete representation increased the understanding, immediate grasp much more. Do you use a variety of adaptation to facilitate at least partial participation? Do you use peers as supports? Do you carefully monitor the prompts given for those learning objectives, for breaking the task down and what the student is accomplishing? Are you monitoring the progress? And are you enabling partial participation? And do you use any kind of work simulation experiences that is available within the campus? Like shelving books or watering plants or helping with the school store and all that. Oh, this is wonderful to see that concrete objects are very heavily used. That's wonderful. And adapted tools are used. This is great. And lots and lots of you seem to be using adapted tools. That's great. And I'm going to skip to results. This is about 73% of you use adapted tools. This is the way to go, especially for students with severe and multiple disabilities. And I think I have mostly shared some of these things, but adapted eating and drinking utensils, it looks like many of you use it. Curved utensils, flexible long-handled fork, universal cuff, materials in the optimal position and within the field of vision, and you're stabilizing the materials using either Dyson mat, using tape, Velcro, or suction cups to hold cups, bowls in place, pictures, objects in small. One of the things that I found, for example, that I'm including here, placing objects in a cookie sheet for student to be able to, so that accidentally the student is not accidentally moving the object and the object doesn't fall down. So a cookie tray helps to keep the objects within that tray so that it is easier for the student to manipulate them. and making sure that you are reducing the background noises and using a kind of event sequence, an adapted calendar, proper lighting to enhance vision, especially this is helpful for students with visual needs, lighting, contrast, when you are presenting materials and providing materials and text paired with pictures, and combining visual information with auditory and tactile, and also occasionally provide olfactory clues, but of course you have to be careful about any allergies, and incorporate from time to time movement activities. And for a student who is not able to ambulate himself or who uses a wheelchair, one of the ways the student can participate may be use a drum, to beat on the drum for the music, or use something called a stir xylophone if the student is able to use his hands, or attach a drumstick and hit the drum with that drumstick, a smaller size drum. So these are ways the student can participate, while students who are able to move are moving for the music. The student who is using a wheelchair can also be part of that musical movement activity. There are some more ideas for using concrete items and indicating response, yes or no, happy, sad, I like cucumber, I don't like cucumber, I like sandwich, I don't like sandwich, indicating response, so that something that's colorful, something that immediately attracts their attention, something that they use for making their responses. And I've also suggested to use, you can make your own adapted cuff for each student that you need, and you can insert objects in there. This is using a headliner cloth. And several scenarios that I'm presenting here. Student is an 8-year-old student in a second grader and has visual impairment. What are we doing? Some of the things I've already shared, but I am just showing it as a chart so that you know clearly what are some of the supports that you would use, what would be the focus objectives for that particular student who has significant needs and who uses eye gaze. How do we promote social interaction? How do we coach the para-educator not to be next to her all the time so that she doesn't become dependent? And how do we use concrete items so that the student can feel the item and grasp the item when it is inserted in her hand? How do we help her to follow a sequence of activities? So another student, I'm sorry, I don't know what's happened. I wish I had known this, that it's all bundling up together. For a student who has an elementary student and he is able to greet, he is able to communicate using a few phrases and words, and you want to take him at that level and move him beyond that, and he is able to attend to a story for 2 or 3 minutes, and gradually increasing the time. He likes to pace around the room, so that's one of the issues that we want to make sure. So you would focus on a learning objective that reduces that pacing so that you use him to play a role in that activity. He has a role to play which prevents his moving away from where he is seated to move around the classroom. And some of the things that would help him is that he makes a lot of choices. And he also makes a choice to some extent, limited choice that you have given him in order to have a higher sense of control in that activity. And you also expose him to drama and role play because he can use words. He can use a few phrases. So he can play a kind of somewhat of a verbal role in that role play and drama that is, let's say you pretend that you are going to a restaurant and you are making a choice, and that student plays a role in ordering something from the restaurant. So that role play and drama there involves him more actively, and he kind of, let's say, you can even make him the cashier. You can make him the customer. So different roles, so that helps him. And combine it with some assistive technology. Again, a middle school student similarly attending to a story. This is a student who uses a wheelchair, and these are all an object-based schedule. And only one thing I do want to mention here, and that is using on-the-go activities to build concepts. What do I mean by that? Let's say the student is going to the cafeteria. And it's a long distance, and he uses a wheelchair, and somebody is pushing his wheelchair. So is that a time that you can use to maybe that he has either something he does on the wheelchair tray, and while he's waiting in line, can he use that particular item? Maybe it's a small puzzle, or it may be a color-coded number sequence. Can he do that so that the waiting time is maximally utilized? And that can be done even, let's say, you are riding, he's using the wheelchair to go to the gym or go to the library on the way, or you can point to, let's say, 2 numbers or 3 numbers and say, give me the 2 or give me the 1, or use an eye gaze board and use that time too, because sometimes there is a great deal of wait time, and that wait time becomes wasted time. So can we use that as an opportunity for on the go? And preparing the student for the future, job preparation, matching tasks, sorting, assembling, packing. These are all different things you can use. Training in both the hard and the soft skills. Working with the partner. That is possible within the school setting for us to provide that opportunity. And self-management, and to be able to pick up his ID badge, or at least point to the ID badge when they ask you, who are you, what's your name, what are you going to be doing, or anything like that, then to be able to point to the ID card instead of somebody else saying, this is Susan, or this is Anna, somebody else. The student is able to point to her ID card herself. So that is part of your self-advocacy. And I have included on that slide a website that offers some additional information. So what are some jobs around the campus? I know I'm going beyond time. I apologize, but just a few more minutes. Water plants within the campus, shelf books in the library, other work simulation, book stamping. Maybe they can stamp books in the library if they are able to use their hands. Sharpen pencils for classrooms, bundle towels for the cafeteria, and there are associated learning objectives. And each time you involve your students in any of these, make sure you have a certain objective that are associated, and you make sure you monitor the progress. And let's say a high school student who is ambulatory is able to manipulate small and large objects and can hold a spoon, then these are some of the learning objectives. He makes choices. Follow 2-3-step directions, greeting others with a smile, and initiating communication with peers. What do we mean? It may be something simple as hello, and my name is, or pointing to the ID card. And what are some job simulation activities? Shelving books, helping in the school cafeteria. And if you have like a print shop project, you can involve the student in that, making copies. Making in one of the high schools, the students these were students who were not using words to communicate, and they were involved in making a topiary, beautiful topiary. And or you may involve them making a herb garden, and maybe they can even sell it to the school staff. So make sure there are all these work simulation projects. The fact that they are not using words to communicate, the fact that they have motor needs really should not interfere. Just you design the activity and have partial participation if needed for the student to engage in that activity. So finally, as we conclude, what we want to promote access. We want to promote engagement. We want to make sure the student has opportunity to respond. And multisensory materials to complement with your instruction. Lots and lots and lots of hands-on activities and real-life situation in order to prepare the student for life outcomes, functional and personal living outcomes. And I cannot overemphasize that the para-educator support is discreet and not intrusive. It is important that we follow the prompt hierarchy and we don't always use hand-over-hand prompting, gradually reduce that intensity of prompts. And make sure that we foster the learner's independence and consistent and systematic use of progress monitoring so that we know what the student has accomplished at the end of the year so that we can address those needs that is shown by the monitoring, by monitoring the progress to plan ahead for the future years. And reteaching and repeated practice is extremely important for students with severe and multiple disabilities and with significant needs. And this is the book from which I have borrowed a tremendous amount of material for this presentation. It has 34 different instructional organizers, including math and literacy and science, as well as personal living, social togetherness, and pre-vocational. So this is the book that where I drew the information. It is published by LRP Publications. And there are a number of resources included. Tasks Galore for the real world is a very valuable tool. And it includes domestic skills, vocational skills, independent living skills, and job sites, and school transition ideas. And then Amanda Letsos, she provides a detailed description along with photographs on how to use the adapted cup for students who have that kind of motor need. And finally, again, I'm sorry, I went over a few minutes. I apologize. A special, very special thanks to all of you for staying with me. And then another very special thanks to the AbleNet University for hosting the webinar. And I have a couple of webinars in the future, both in August, and both of them focus on behavior strategies. That's based on my new behavior guide. Thank you very much. I appreciate your participating in the webinar today.